Hello everyone, my name is Rosalia Tufano and I'm a PhD student at Università della Svizzera Italiana in Lugano, Switzerland. In particular, I'm a member of the CERT research group working on the Devinta project. The goal of the Devinta project is to build a sort of assistant for software developers able to support them in different tasks and in different phases of the software lifecycle. In this video, I'm gonna present the work using reinforcement learning for load testing of video games, in which we propose an approach to support game developers in testing video games. More precisely, we investigate the possibility of using reinforcement learning for a specific type of game testing, that is load testing. But what is load testing? Load testing aims at identifying possible performance issues in the game. And in this work, we focus in particular on a specific type of performance issues experienced by gamers, namely parts of the game exhibiting a drop of frame per second, making thus the game lagging. So let's spend 1 minute to understand how the frame per second can affect the game experience. To animate the game on the screen, the software generates a sequence of images or frames. Now, by rendering the frames one after the other on the screen, they give the impression of the movement, as shown in this flipbook that you can see on the slide. The only difference between this GIF and the frames of a video game is that there is a variability in the frames shown by the game on the screen depending on the inputs provided by the gamer, for example, through the controller. Also, frames can have different complexity, with those featuring particularly complex visualizations that may require more time to load. The fluidity of the game is strictly related to the frame rate, or frames per second, which simply measures the number of frames a game is able to visualize in a second. The higher such a number, the more fluid the game experience. One of the goals of load testing is to identify those areas of the game that cause a drop in the number of frames per second. So what happens is that humans play for hours trying to identify such areas. Of course, this activity requires a smart interaction with the game, because the tester must be able to explore different areas of the game. In the context of a shooter video game, this means, for example, the ability of advancing in the game without being killed by an enemy. The basic idea behind our work is that a smart agent trained to play the game as a human tester would can reduce the human effort in this expensive activity. To build such an agent, one of the options is to use reinforcement learning. But what is reinforcement learning? Well, reinforcement learning is a machine learning technique based on the simple idea of trial and error. Let's see how it works. There is an agent interacting with an environment with a precise goal. The agent can perform some defined actions in the environment, and based on the performed actions, it receives a reward, a score. The reward, it is strictly related to the agent's goal, and it is a sort of feedback about how good it is performing in the environment. So at the beginning, the agent tries to reach its goal performing some random actions. Then, try by try, it learns how to properly act to reach the goal. It's quite clear that reinforcement learning is very well suited for learning how to play games. And in fact, researchers started training reinforcement learning-based agents, achieving very good results in playing very simple games such as Atari games, as well as very complex games such as StarCraft or Dota 2. Recently, researchers also started exploring reinforcement learning techniques to support game developers in testing activities, in particular for the automatic identification of functional bugs, meaning that the game has an unexpected behavior, for example, when the game crashes. In these approaches, the reinforcement learning agent is mainly trained with the aim of winning the game, with additional heuristic then used to verify, for example, if the game crashes. But this is different from the behavior of a human tester, because the latter play the game with the goal of exploring it while actively searching for bugs. Let's see what is the difference from a technical point of view. Okay, so in general we have three main blocks. We have the game, the reward function, and the reinforcement learning model. The game provides the reinforcement learning model with the game state. It can be, for example, the screen of the game itself, but also an array of numbers specifying the position of the agent in the environment. So it is something that describes the status of the game in that moment. The reinforcement learning model, based on the current status of the game, it decides which kind of action it wants to perform. It provides this information to the game, and the game executes the action. Now, based on what it gets, so the next status of the game provides the reward function with game information. For example, the number of enemies the agent was able to kill so far. So informations that describe how good the agent is performing in the game. The reward function, so based on this information, provide the reward to the reinforcement learning model, so to the agent. So we will refer to this approach as the reinforcement learning baseline. This instead is our approach that we called reline. As you can notice, the only difference is in the information that the game provides to the reward function. In fact, in our case, the reward function asks for two kinds of informations: game information as the reinforcement learning baseline and FPS information. Because in our case, the agent has two goals. One is win the game, but the other one is to identify those areas of the game where there is a drop of frame per second, so point that we call low FPS point. And so the reward function is built to push the agent in both this direction, and we aim in this way to emulate the behavior of a human tester. To evaluate our approach reline, we started with a preliminary study. In this study, what we want to do is to assess the potential of our approach, but on two simple games in which we do not expect some performance issues, but we inject them. The first game we selected is Cart Pull. In Cart Pull, there is a pole attached to a cart that the player can move. More precisely, the player can apply a force to the right or to the left in order to stabilize the pull on the cart. If the pull is not stable, it can crash, and in this case, the player loses the game. The second game we selected is Mrs. Pac-Man. In this game, as I think you all know, the player is the yellow circle, and its goal is to hit all the dots in the map without being eaten by the ghosts. Now, as I said, in this kind of games we do not expect real performance issues. So what we did was to inject some artificial bugs. For the cart pull, since the agent can just move on the right or on the left, what we did was to inject two bugs, one on the left and one on the right, based on the position of the cart. What does it mean? It means that when the cart is in the same position of the first bug on the left, for example, the reward function receives information of a low FPS point. We did a similar thing for Miss Pac-Man. In this case, since the map is a little bit bigger, we injected four bugs, again based on the position. So when the yellow circle is in the same position of one of the bugs, the reward function receives information about a low FPS point. Okay, so to evaluate our approach, what we did was to compare the agent trained with Reline against two other agents. The first one is a reinforcement learning baseline, so an agent with the only goal of win the game, and a random agent, so an agent that performs some random actions. The choice of compare Reline with a random agent is based on the fact that sometimes some software systems can be tested performing some random actions. So we let these 3 agents playing 1000 games while we collected the information about the low FPS point. And here we have the results. We reported the percentage of cases in which the agent is able to spot one or more bugs in the same game for each agent and for each toy game. We can notice that the random agent was not really good in spotting bugs, but it is for the randomness of the agent itself, because performing some random actions, the agent is not able to play, so it loses the game very fast and it has no time to explore the environment and spot bugs. The reinforcement learning baseline instead was quite good in spotting at least one bug in one game. Finally, Reline demonstrated to be very good in spotting all the bugs in a single game, with the exception of Cartpool. Here the problem is that the game has a limited time, and so to spot both bugs, the agent needs to move on the first bug and then move on the second one, while keeping the pole stable on the cart. And this is not really easy, considered the limited time. Okay, so at this point we evaluated Reline on a real 3D open source game, SuperTux Kart, in which we can expect some real performance issues. The game is a kart game in which the agent has to drive along the track and reach the finish line. Now, to spot low FPS point during the game, we need a reliable way to capture the frame rate, so to measure the time the game takes to generate the next frame. So what we did was to train a reinforcement learning baseline, so an agent that is able to play the game, and let it play 300 identical games, so games during which the agent performs exactly the same actions. On the horizontal axis we have the actions, and on the vertical axis we have the time in milliseconds that the game takes to render the frames after each action. And we can notice that the trend of the frame rate is the same for each game. So now we have a reliable way to measure the frame rate, but how can we define what is a low FPS point? So when we have actually a problem of performance. So again, we trained the reinforcement learning baseline, so an agent that is able to play the game, and we let it play this time 300 different games. During each of these games, we collected the frame rate, and using statistical analysis, we defined a threshold to identify the outliers that for us are low FPS point. So again, to evaluate our approach Reline, we trained a reinforcement learning baseline agent, so an agent just able to play, and a random agent, so an agent that simply performs some random actions. And here we have the results. We can notice that Reline was the best agent in spotting low FPS points, but also the random agent was quite good in spot such points compared to the reinforcement learning baseline. But let's see this result closer. Here we have a violin plot showing the characteristics of the point spotted by the agents. The red line is the threshold we defined to decide what is a low FPS point, so everything that is above this line is considered a low FPS point, and this can be fine-tuned by the developer. While in white we have regular FPS point. So in blue we have the low FPS point spotted by Reline, in green the low FPS point spotted by the reinforcement learning baseline, and in red the points spotted by the random agents. More interesting is the position of these spotted points in the environment of the game, that we describe using two values, the centering and the path done. The centering is the position of the agent relative to the center of the track. Instead, the path done is the position of the agent relative to the finish line. So we can notice that the random agent sometimes goes off of the track and spot low FPS points that are in an area of the game that is unlikely to be explored by a real gamer. And moreover, it is able to spot this kind of points only at the beginning of the game, because it is not really able to play the game. While Reline, our approach, is able to spot low FPS points starting from the start of the game till the end of the map. To conclude, I want to briefly summarize what we have seen in this presentation. So I presented you the work using reinforcement learning for load testing of video games. I introduced what is load testing and what is the idea behind the reinforcement learning. I gave you an overview of our approach, Reline. I described the preliminary study that we performed and the results we obtained. Finally, I described the case study and the results we obtained. If you want to know more about this work, you can scan the QR codes in this slide to reach the paper on arXiv and the replication package on GitHub. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the presentation and see you in the next conference.